welcome back to the Diablo podcast, episode 2, and surprisingly happening not with a 3-year gap. I'm your host, Xanth, and today I am joined by Nineball.
Oh, hi.
And Holy Knight.
Hi, all.
So, as we jump into this week's news, it is actually with a heavy heart that we bring up the fact that Travis Day, one of the designers of Diablo 3, has passed away. It is never, well, I should say it is hard to sometimes view the other side of the equation. We love the games. We have respect for the people who work on them, but often we don't see them as people, right? And Travis was somebody integral in the game that we love and in the history of the game, and it is extremely sad to lose somebody with an influence like that.
Yeah. I did not know him, but I had the capability of having a chance to have a couple conversations with him about game design, particularly with Diablo 3, though he had also worked on WoW prior. He seemed like a genuinely nice guy, that was very, very passionate, extremely passionate about the things that, he was in charge of in terms of like itemization and later on like skill design on the Necromancer and things like that, and how skills and items can go kind of like feedback into one another. And so, yeah, it was a sad day finding that out.
Yeah, I first knew of him back in Wrath of the Lich King around the final patch there, with his tweaking gear and things for the warriors, like you're saying, about the just getting all that stuff right, the bells and the whistles. Heck, I know I had a two-handed weapon that was based on his name. I think it's Rumdalny or Imdelmar, maybe one of those.
Yeah,
names.
his in-game name was Indalmar, and so in Diablo 3 they reverse it, so it's the Ramaladnis.
Yeah, and I think his weapon's actually called the Ramnadli too.
Okay.
So, but that's all I remember of him, other than all the awesome work he did with Diablo 3 over the years too. It's kind of surprised me that when that happened, I was like, wait a second,
Yeah, absolutely. Especially at a young age, to lose somebody that obviously had a lot more that they could do is extremely detrimental and obviously extremely disheartening. And obviously our thoughts go out to his friends and his family. We don't know him, but I think we can take a step back and obviously respect everything that he has given to us, and that's huge. Now there's never a good transition, from anything like that. But as we, kind of move forward in honoring, the legacy and the things that he has built, one of those things is the continuation of Diablo 3. And there is some good news on the horizon for that. We have found out, we had heard the season was ending, and we know that season 27 will be starting on August 26th. So with that news, guys, do you have any plans for your new Diablo 3 season?
Well, I'm definitely getting the shield ready to go again, like always. I might do the phalanx build instead of thorns. We'll see. I'll play around a bit, but it'll definitely be manning the satyr still. That's for me.
I've got a couple of things because they're doing. Of course, they have the Traggles, rework. It's going to be really awesome to have like a Traggles Nova build. It's going to be great fun. Last time I was able to like effectively play, a Death Nova, Poison Nova build was like back during the 4 cube slot season. So
that was a fun season.
Yeah, it's been a very long time since we've really had a viable Death Nova build, so I'm really looking forward to that going through, coming out. And that's not even all that this season offers Necromancers. They've got some of the best sacred powers. So like being able to like push like in game with like a pestilence set because of the just having so many corpses available from the golem, where it's turning one corpse into the 15 or whatever your like attack speed max for the Devour is and such. So it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun times for going and playing Necro. And the season comes out the day before my birthday, so there's that.
There you go. Happy birthday.
That's always a nice little bit of kismet where it's, like, oh, it's my day. I get to do what I want, and there's something brand new and shiny for me to play with. So obviously, happy birthday to you, Nine Ball. If we don't see you before then,
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I won't call for a podcast on that day.
I'll be too busy playing Diablo.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is a good problem to have. And speaking of which, as we're in that transition kind of period here, I want to put out a general thank you to all of you guys. To you, Holy Knight, to you, Nine Ball, and to everybody else who's on our little server to join the podcast. It is really cool that after 3 years of no podcast to put out just really one or two messages and have you guys join back up this quickly has been amazing. And I do want to say that I'm very appreciative of your time and effort that goes in on this. It's really nice. All right, so we're done. Congratulations.
Hey, anytime.
Just happy to be here. You don't have to threaten me with a good time. He sends me an email. Hey, you want to talk Diablo? Yes.
But I do want to say I'm very appreciative of all of you just for that fact that I can go 3 years of being in the dark and be like, oh yeah, hey, let's chat. Like, oh yeah, I'm there. Definitely appreciative.
It's like time never stops. Just like boom, boom. There you go.
Right back at it. Now, speaking of which, the topic for today and why you both are very much here surrounds Diablo's lore. When I was first hooked on Diablo, the original Diablo, I was taking that massive booklet to bed, trying to glean as much information as I possibly could about the history behind Leoric and the other prime evils and who they were and what they might be capable of. And I was interested. I didn't go as far as I know that you guys have. I followed the story. I didn't skip cutscene. But there's been some novels along the way that I missed. And I think I'm not alone in that. So the Diablo story is tough. I'm not going to ask you to tackle everything. Despite I know that you could, because unfortunately we just don't have that kind of time. But
you might not.
Those people out there, for those people out there that have skipped the cutscenes, or maybe have forgotten the story because they haven't played in a little while and they're just ramping up to get back to Diablo 4. What is the story in the best condensed version that you got? What is the story starting from beginning? Well, we don't have, beginning is arbitrary because beginning could be Diablo 1 or it could be the actual origin. So what is the story? And I'll leave that to you guys.
You mind if I take this one?
Please.
All right. So, there's obviously, as Xanth was going through and saying, there is kind of like the two beginnings to the story. One, of course, just being the story of Diablo 1. The ancient evil is awakened, possesses, the son of a great king, and the kingdom falls into ruin and despair while a whole bunch of adventurers go down in order trying to defeat them. And it's, later changed subtly to where the person that goes down and defeats him isn't just some random adventure, but the king's other son, the brother of Albrecht, who was turned into Diablo. And then the Albrecht himself shoving or not Albrecht, but Aiden going through and shoving the soul stone into his forehead, then transferring the essence of Diablo into him and spreading evil across the globe as another band of adventurers that are going through and searching for action and excitement get, taken up in this great, journey going through across the world of Sanctuary to try and defeat not just one of the prime evils, but all, three of the prime evils during the course of their adventures. And then finally, going through into Diablo 3, where yet another adventurer takes up the mantle to try and stop the prophecy of the end of days, where Diablo has now put into his plans to form all of the 7 great evils. That's the 3 primes, Mephisto, Baal, and Diablo, and then the 4 lessers, Andariel, Duriel, Asmodan, and Belial, back into their original essence of Tathamet, the prime evil, the singular entity that made up all of the negative, chaotic elements of the universe, so that way he could win the eternal conflict and destroy heaven and rule over everything. Going back further and then diving into the books, and I think the thing that really is going to be into play with Diablo 4 just knocking at the door as everyone sits here and is waiting, like what comes next, is it really is going to focus in on some of the storylines that were created in the novels, particularly the Sin War trilogy, where a lot of the current Diablo lore kind of looks back to in its roots. Of course, the Nephalim, the creation of Sanctuary itself, and such, where it's always kind of been alluded to of the eternal conflict, the battle between heaven and hell, that it was kind of that was talked about in the lore books and such in Diablo 1, and later kind of came a little bit more in Diablo 2, where they kind of gave more of a focus for it, that they're wanting to go through and actually fight for like the world stone and such. And so there's this whole big thing with pandemonium and this great powerful object, and then that's then later to developed in the novels themselves, where what is the world stone, what is this thing, what are the angels and demons fighting over. And it all comes down to the world stone, the Eye of Anu. And what that is it's this leftover piece of the original creator deity of the Diablo universe. And with it, you have the power of creation. You can create worlds, realities, whatever it is that you want. But the angels and demons have always fought over this artifact since literally the beginning of time. And nothing that they've created has ever lasted. The demons, everything that they make is far too chaotic. Any world that they have created always eats itself or tears itself apart. And the angels, whenever they create something, is so orderly and strict that life cannot come from it. They create a quote unquote perfect world that is dead. It's so rigid that nothing can exist there. And it was only when a renegade angel and a renegade demon, Anarius and Lilith, which is names that you're going to be hearing a lot, especially Diablo 4. I mean, Lilith is the poster child of the game. They got tired of this, this great conflict, and they kind of conspired together to get some other angels and demons that had become tired of all the fighting to their cause to steal the World Stone. And they wanted to go through and create their own, little hideaway, their own sanctuary, hence the name. And it's only with the combined essence of the angels and the demons that they created a world that could exist, that created life. And that's how Sanctuary, itself came to be. There was a lot of other things, everything, shit kind of hit the fan when they started to commingle, and then Nephilim came about. Because going back to that original creator deity, Anu, he embodied all of creation in the beginning, but decided to tear out all of the evil from himself, which formed, the great 7-headed dragon Tathamet that I mentioned earlier. And it's only when those two essences are brought back together can you actually tap into that original power of kind of like the god of, the Diablo universe itself, who of course is long since dead. Anu and Tathamet killed one another. And it is that unlocking of that essence that gave them power that superseded that of even Anarius, who is an extremely powerful angel, or Lilith, who is the daughter of Mephisto, one of the most powerful demons in hell outside of the 7. And these Nephilim, these upstart new beings, scared them with their capability, but Lilith saw an opportunity. She saw them as a tool that she could win the eternal conflict. And so she wasn't, thinking anymore about having her own little hideaway or whatever. She kind of went back to her roots and was like, I can win. It's no longer about getting away from the eternal conflict. It's about winning the eternal conflict. Not heaven or hell, but me. Me and my children are going to go through and we're going to destroy everything. And by manipulating the world stone, she was able to help control the Nephilim. She rallied some to her side, and her just being a great being of power itself was able to effectively kill off all the other angels and demons on Sanctuary that stood against her. Because there were some that had a similar idea to herself, that wanted to go through and use the Nephilim as a tool. There were others that saw them as unholy abominations that should be destroyed. Anarius, who was her lover, was greatly conflicted himself and had gone into exile to try and think about whether he should keep the Nephilim, or kill them. He wasn't sure. But when he came back from this exile, he found that Lilith had kind of raised Sanctuary, killed all the other angels and demons, and was just like, hey, dear, look what I did. And so they came to blows, with Anarius finally gaining the upper hand, not being able to bring himself to kill her, used the World Stone in order to banish her from Sanctuary. He allowed the Nephilim the good grace of being able to stay alive and said, be gone, from my sight. Some rebelled, and that was an event called the Scouring, where the Anarius went out using the World Stone, killed off most of the Nephilim, and then the remaining ones kind of retreated underground. Anarius then used the World Stone in order to damper the Nephilim's powers, and so that way every successful generation was less and less powerful, until eventually you just got humans. And now the humans themselves still show some of that heritage. That's your heroes in Diablo 1, your heroes in Diablo 2, obviously Diablo 3. That any of the spellcasters you've heard about in the lore or anything like that, they're channeling their inner Nephilim power and allowing just a little fraction of that to come to the forefront, in order to have those great powers and channel and actually challenge these great demons and such. And that's where we get into the story of Diablo 1, 2, and 3, and the framework that we're kind of heading towards for Diablo 4. Lilith being the poster child on there, it definitely is going to deal something with her. I wouldn't be surprised if some aspect of the World Stone, even though it's been destroyed, begins to go through, come up. But it's definitely going to be some story about the Nephilim, her connection to Anarius and such. Those are just going to be given, but what form that they take, we don't know.
I was so engrossed by that.
Just like story time with 9. Just chill.
I'm and I mentioned this this weekend. Nineball was tweeting about Warhammer, and there's something about hearing somebody talk about something that they're passionate about. Even and I definitely understood the Diablo story, but like I could not recite all of it like that.
Yeah,
it is always cool to just be engrossed by someone's passion. So thinking about Holy Knight, is there anything he missed? Call him to the carpet on this one.
He covered it pretty well, to be honest with you.
I did leave out a lot of the story of Diablo 1, 2, and 3. If you want to fill in anything there.
Nah, I know. I recently reread the comic book. The
Sword of Justice.
That was it. Actually, now that we've got what we got now, the blood plagues. It makes more sense now versus back then when this is like, it's okay. But now when you go back and you're like, oh, this actually fills in the proper gaps. We just didn't realize it. Like
Yeah.
It's still fun to see.
As you bring up the graphic novel, and we're talking, there are many volumes here outside of the story. I'm curious from a lore perspective, if you were trying to hook somebody, I mean, what's your favorite story beat from any of this? What is it a part of the game that if they were paying attention that they would want to then seek things out, or is it a particular novel story, graphic novel that somebody who isn't aware of would then kind of be engrossed like you two have?
Well, for me, the Sidmore trilogy is definitely a nice foundational piece of lore. And that's why I'm happy when we go into Diablo 4. That's going to be a lot more. So it's like a full circle finally coming back. So to me, it's the Sin War trilogy, and then probably the comic book, to be honest.
Could you paraphrase the Sin War trilogy as best you can? I mean, like I know Nineball gave us a pretty broad overview. The Sin War trilogy, for anybody who hasn't read it, I mean, what are we dealing with?
It's been a while since I've read this book. You'll have to forgive me.
You can tag me in if you need to.
I might have to tag you in right now.
All right, Nineball, go.
He's my healer.
Okay. So the Sin War trilogy is basically what helped expand upon the story of Inarius and Lilith. We had, kind of learned about the eternal conflict and that like these are beings that had existed, and such. Such as in Diablo 1, it actually in the manual talks about Inarius, about how he was a vainglorious archangel that had been captured by Mephisto and was chained down, in the realm of hatred with his skin all flayed out. In a room full of mirrors, so that way he had to look at the grotesque thing that he had become because he had been so vain. Obviously, that's been retconned as, angels in Diablo no longer have skin. But that kind of similar story beat continues through this with the Sin War was an event that was alluded to and was actually like the one novel that is no longer canon is Demon's Bane. It was the first novel that Blizzard had ever done. It was an ebook back in the early ebook fad of like the 1999 2000. And it was supposed to take place during the Sin War, where it was an actual physical battle between heaven and hell on the world of Sanctuary. But that story, of course, largely changed, and the Sin War became more of a Cold War. The World Stone, in addition to dampening the powers of the Nephilim and turning them into humans, also hid Sanctuary. So during this time period, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, we don't know. Sanctuary remained hidden, as well as the World Stone. The internal conflict itself came to a grinding halt. The angels in heaven, the demons in hell had no idea what was going on. They had no idea what happened to the World Stone, and the only thing that they were spent doing was looking for it. There wasn't really a ceasefire, but they had just stopped paying attention to one another to actually come to combat over it. Eventually, some unlucky Vigeri sorcerer trying to conjure some elemental spirits summons a demon into Sanctuary, and all of a sudden, hell knows where the World Stone is. It's very difficult because of the World Stone having that dampening field. It's very difficult for the demons to manifest them fully into Sanctuary, but the greater demons, Baal, Mephisto, and such, that they can push their essence into the world, and in order to try and bring about enough like energy and sacrifices and magical power to actually like bring the full force of hell into the world, as well as to try and combat Inarius's control over it. They created the Church of the Triune in order to spread the message of life. What was it? It's, I believe, Baal had become like the giver of life. Mephisto was the giver of love, and Diablo was the giver of courage. Kind of like their polar opposites. And then Inarius, of course, detected this, and instead of just going through and banishing them, decided to play their own game, formed his own church, the Church of Light, in order to have kind of like this cold war over the souls of all of humanity. During the events of the Sin War, Lilith somehow manages to escape her imprisonment in the Abyss, comes back to Sanctuary, and with her connection to the World Stone, alters it slightly. That allows the Nephilim power to really, truly awaken within humanity on a grand scale, instead of a few lucky ones that have the proper birthright in order to actually tap into that power. This along comes this one simple farmer named Odyssean that ends up being the savior of Sanctuary, as he gets kind of torn into this conflict between the forces of hell and Inarius himself, while eventually all of this conflict and such kind of raises the attention of heaven. Tyrael ends up being the angel that finds Sanctuary and kind of manipulates things even further, so that way the forces of heaven and Inarius are just going to end up destroying themselves, so heaven can kind of come in and finish the job, kill everybody else, take the world stone, and just go back to business as usual. It doesn't sound like the Tyrael that you remember from the games, especially in Diablo 3, but he does eventually have a turn of heart and sees that there is, in fact, good inside the hearts of humanity. He no longer sees us as kind of like these things or abominations, but as brethren that are actually worth saving. Eventually, an all-out assault comes through where the forces of hell and the forces of heaven finally just start pouring into the world, and the kind of like the doom is upon us. But Odyssean goes through and manages to actually kind of rip control of the World Stone away from Inarius and manipulates it so that way it pushes. It pushes out all the forces of heaven and hell, sacrificing himself in order to kind of like end the conflict. And during this time, there's kind of like an armistice that is actually formed, where the Angiras Council and the Mephisto acting on behalf of Hell negotiate a deal. We saw this one single mortal man banish all of the hosts of the heavens and all of the forces of hell, with just a whim, and he fundamentally altered the world stone that the angels and demons have always just fought over, but they've never been able to change its innate structure like Odyssean was able to, because he resonated with it being a Nephalim. And so they decided, let's give them a chance. There's now a third player in the eternal conflict, and we'll allow Sanctuary to develop on its own and see where things play out. And that's kind of like the overarching story, for the Sin War trilogy. Of course, during these events, Inarius and Lilith come to blows again. Inarius, now with the full control of the World Stone, just kind of snaps his fingers and banishes Lilith again, and we don't see her until, of course, that beautiful opening cutscene for Diablo 4 that we were introduced to a couple of years ago, where she's summoned back into our world.
And so, Holy Knight, what is it about that trilogy for you that resonated, that captured your attention so much?
It broadened the world so much. I already loved it to begin with, and then it just added so much depth, life. I just loved it. It just so much was added to the game world, and I'd love to have more like that, to be honest with you. The more lore, the more knowledge, the more I'll be able to just enjoy Sanctuary as a whole. That's my big thing when it comes to lore in games like this.
I like that as a point in terms of broadening things. It felt to me a lot in Diablo 3 that things were becoming a lot smaller. Like we were introduced to a lot of of the different demons that we had never met before, but it felt like everything was coming to us, and the world was really shrinking in on us too much. And the world didn't seem as big,
Yeah.
And maybe perhaps that's an advantage with an open world that we'll be seeing in Diablo 4. Nineball, same question. I mean, your story that kind of hooked you in, the story that you would push people to start with, to get them to really bite on the lore of Diablo.
I have two answers for this one. My first answer is also the Sin War trilogy. Because the baseline story for Diablo 3, and of course with Diablo 4 involving Lilith, and this is kind of like the Sin War trilogy is the key book that actually developed Lilith as an entity and as a character, setting forth her motivations. That was the first source where she was called like the mother of Sanctuary and such. So it's almost like that is a focal point that a lot of the modern Diablo lore is referencing back to. And so reading that story, I think, is tantamount, to understanding the game and the world. And so it's definitely something that you have to go through and read. The part where I then change from that is the books are terrible. I'm sorry to go through and say it, but Richard Dack, as far as like the Diablo novels, has written some of my favorite novels. Because in my answer of what I would want to introduce somebody to into the world is Kingdom of Shadow and Moon of the Spider. Those are two, also by Richard Knack, two of the best written books in the series. These are, for if you're a seasoned reader or avid fiction reader and such, these are kind of more pulpy fiction. We're writing on a deadline for a major corporation type thing. It's what they are. Obviously, it's not even Knack's best works as compared to like the Dragon Realms and such. But the Sin War trilogy, you can tell was pushed out on a deadline. Like they're editing mistakes and all those other types of stuff. And I'm not just saying like, oh, they put the twice or that's misspelled or something like that. Literally, there's one scene in the first novel where a character goes out to hunt and then they're ambushed, by like some inquisitors. And then all of a sudden, he's in the ones that are captured, even though in the previous scene he wasn't even there. And now he's captured in a prison, a magical prison in the middle of this clearing. And then later on comes back out of the woods to help save the day. Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
it's one of those ones where it's definitely they're great for fundamentally understanding the characters' motivations and things of how the story for Diablo 3 and what we're guessing the story for Diablo 4 is set up. But caveat being, they are difficult reads. They're very difficult reads. It's not the best writing. I also, it's one of those things. I hate recommending them as a first read, because if you go through and you read them and you are an avid reader or anything like that, the editing errors, in addition to like the plotting and the pacing and some of the characters, are just difficult to get through. I don't want that being like your first taste of the fiction that's out there. The Order by Nate Kenyon is also that one is probably one of like just the singular best written books that are in the entire Diablo franchise. And that was the one that helped set up the story for Diablo 3. What Cain was doing, who Leo was, and all those other types of such is another marvelous one. But if I were to really recommend something to just get someone hooked into the Diablo universe, Kingdom of the Spider, combining the two, Kingdom of Shadow, which introduces the Necromancer Zale. In that book, he's a supporting character. And then the Moon of the Spider, which then takes place just a few months after the events of Lord of Destruction, and puts Zale at the forefront. It's just a very well-written character, a lot of fun, helps explore a lot of things, and of course, he's a necromancer.
I was going to say, it's your favorite class, so there's a little bit of bias.
If you never played the video games and only read the Diablo novels, you would know that necromancers are the actual true defenders of Sanctuary and the superheroes that no one appreciates.
The balance, if you will.
The balance, yeah.
Yep.
It is. So I purchased the Necromancer pack for PlayStation. I've had it for years on PC, but my son and I are playing through it, and I think he's fully converted. The first corpse explosion was enough. He'd been playing a little bit. I went back to work today. I'm a teacher, so it was our first day of classes, so he got to play games. And I came home and we played a little bit tonight. And the Necromancer has the saying about, I forget the exact wording, but it's something about the scales. And he looks at me, he's like, well, they're talking about balancing out life and death, Dad. So we're good guys. I'm like, I'm proud of you, son.
Nice.
Would be proud of you. I have nothing against necromancers. I just prefer druids. And
yes. And it's that balance that is one of the core tenets that is kind of actually even in the because in the Sin War trilogy you actually get Mendelin, who becomes the first necromancer. Rathma is a character in it. That you see the actual birth of the necromancy, the foundation of what the balance in the cycle is and such, and also you're introduced that angels are kind of assholes. They don't really like us. We've only ever seen Tyrael and he's always on our side, and then we see Imperius in Diablo 3 and it's like, that guy's a jerk. But then that's one of the things I actually appreciate, like in Diablo Immortal, is in the final zone, the Realm of Damnation, you have a little angelic enclave. All the angels there kind of think they're rude. They're like, okay, whatever. You saved all of us and killed one of the lieutenants of hell. I guess I'll fix your gear, like type thing. Angels don't like us. They do truly see us as abominations that shouldn't exist. And that's part of the reason that, Malthael and Reaper of Souls was just like, you know what? You're half demons. That makes you a demon. I got to kill all of you. I got to do it. I'm going to win the eternal conflict by killing all of you.
I mean, I guess it makes sense.
Look where that got him.
Yeah. And the necromancers, that's why the balance that we will ally with heaven to fight demons, but that it's a temporary calling, that we know that the true path for sanctuary, it's not angels, it's not demons. We have to be in it for ourselves.
So since you brought it up, obviously there are a bunch of novels that are pretty easily accessible at this point. Go to your local library, you can buy them online. The one little bit of story that probably has, I don't want to say the least amount of access, because it is technically free, but there are hurdles, maybe moral hurdles, or just bandwagon hurdles, or anything, or just time, right? Diablo Immortal's story, right? There is this gap between Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. Immortal's filling in some of those holes. What is the story that a person can get from it if they haven't already?
I've only played a little bit, so Nine, you're our hero on this one, brother.
I'm sorry for taking up everybody's time.
Oh, you're good.
That's what the people tune in for. Give them
the story in Immortal in a nutshell is, it takes place a few years after the events of Diablo 2. The World Stone's been destroyed, Ariad is a crater, and shards of the World Stone have rained around Sanctuary, still bearing the Baal's corruption. There's the whole thing that we found out, that the Dark Exile, that was that led up to the events of Diablo 1, of the 3 primevals going around Sanctuary, purposefully getting trapped by the Haradrim into Soul Stones, so that way they could later be uncovered, use it to possess humans. But the Soul Stones are shards of the World Stone itself that they'd be able to, given enough time, which apparently in Diablo is around like 300 years, they were able to fully corrupt the Soul Stone and then use that to then bind their essence to the World Stone, corrupting it thoroughly and making it so that way it could be a permanent weapon of hell, giving them an upper hand in the eternal conflict itself. Of course, Tyrael, seeing and realizing this, decides that the only way forward is to destroy the World Stone and reap whatever repercussions come after that. But the parts of the World Stone survived. These shards got rained around Sanctuary, and the events of Diablo Immortal is your adventure teaming up with Deckard Cain to go through, hunt down these shards, and then find a way to destroy them. They are pieces of the World Stone, and although Tyrael made it look easy, mortal means had no real ways of going through and destroying this. It was only through using, some greater power, because your hero isn't like truly like a Nephalim. Your hero of the Diablo Immortal isn't even at the level of the heroes of Diablo 2. You fight one of Diablo's lieutenants. You're not fighting Diablo himself. So it definitely does put you like in a certain power scale. And so you have to hunt down some angelic artifact and such to be used. Basically one of the holdovers from one of the angels that had went to Sanctuary in ages past, that had been left over after Lilith's purge and such, in order to use that angelic relic as a way of destroying these shards of the World Stone, so that way they can't be used. Because as you go across, you're kind of in a race with Skarn, the Lord of Damnation, one of Diablo's lieutenants. You're in a race with him to try and collect some of these pieces of the World Stone, because he's using it in order to, he wants to use the World Stone to kind of ascend humanity by purging the angelic essence from them. He has a similar view as Malthael, whereas Malthael saw the half demon in us, called us demons, and decided that we all have to die. Skarn sees the half demons in us and calls us brother. And so but in order to do it, he has to purge us of our angelic essence, and he needs a fragment of the world stone in order to perfect that. And one of the things that he was practicing on was that enclave of angels. He was experimenting with the angels and such, and finding ways of turning their holy essence into demonic essence. Creating the fallen angels and such that we would later see, quite a bit in Diablo 3. But as we're going through and traveling around, we see the corrupting influence that just these shards of the world stone have, whether it be these cultists of damnation, or a wayward necromancer that's trying to create some undead utopia by killing all life on the on Sanctuary and turning it into a gigantic necropolis, so that way the angels and demons can never take our souls. And it's or just a fallen monk that wants nothing more than to try and resurrect his brother. That then is gets tempted by the devil, as it were. But it's going through hunting these down in order to try and destroy them and stop their corrupting influence. Not just the Lord of Hell that's trying to find them, but just the overall evilness that it brings out in anyone that's around them. And of course, throughout all these, once Skarn eventually does collect one of these shards of the World Stone in order to enact his plan to try and purge the angelic essence from humanity, in order to get them all on his side, recruit a giant army, and win the eternal conflict, also using just a sliver of the World Stone, he's able to go through and channel Diablo's power for himself. He's hauled Diablo's carcass from the Chaos Sanctuary over into his own realm, and he's using that little tiny shard of the World Stone to bind Diablo's soul, so that way he can siphon off all of the power, and he can ascend himself to become one of the greater evils, or just to rule over all of hell itself. Of course, we defeat Skarn, destroy the World Stone shard, and Diablo's soul is now free, though he's not quite fully formed, and we actually end up getting saved by one of those angels that sacrifices himself in order to allow us to escape to fight Diablo's battered form. And that's where the story itself is left off at this point. Diablo's partially reformed somewhere in hell, and we're back in Sanctuary with the potentiality of more shards being found throughout the world.
Well, I'm intrigued.
Yeah,
and
I go back and play.
Yeah, we're not trying to promote. We don't get paid for this. Nobody's giving us anything, so please don't call us shills. But I think it's nice.
You can call me a shill. That's fine. Yeah.
Well, I suppose I can say not to, but it's going to happen anyway. Yeah, I'm intrigued. I've mentioned before. I mentioned in the last pod. I haven't had the time to sit and play, and I don't foresee it. But if I do, it's for the stuff like that. I do enjoy finding those parts of the story and engaging with them.
And there's so much more to it. Like I mentioned, that little angelic enclave. It's so cool that you go there, and like one of the vendors will just go through and call you Child of Exiles. The original. The original renegades that exiled themselves to Sanctuary and such. It's just like the little callbacks. There's definitely there was a lot of tender loving care on the narrative side in Diablo Immortal. That if you care about the story, if you care about the lore, you can play through the entire story. You don't have to put a penny into the game if you don't want to. But there's a lot of really cool little elements. You get to see the fate of the rogues after the events of Diablo 2. They're still going through. They've moved over to the Dark Woods. You get to see some other places of Sanctuary that we've never gotten to see before, like the Shahazar Sea. You get to see Westmarch. That's not being having Armageddon rained upon it by the Angel of Death. You also get to see the barbarians shortly after the destruction of Shesharon and Baal's invasion into Mount Arreat, and how they as a people are handling this and going through and trying to recover and rebuild. which, you know, it's kind of it's actually so many of those things are like sad stories, because you actually go into the ruins of Shesharon, and there's like an enclave of barbarians that are trying to go through and rebuild it, you know, and they're sitting there fighting the remnants of the demonic forces and such. But then you fast forward another 15 years into Diablo 3, and Shesharon is full of only ghosts and demons. So obviously they failed. And so it's you know, there's a lot of those little kind of like sad story notes, because you're like, oh yeah, they're not here anymore. They failed. That's, you know.
I think that poses an interesting question then, you know, in terms of story delivery. You seem very happy there, Nineball. What game do you think delivered its story better? Do you think Diablo Immortal or Diablo 3 did a better job of getting the story out?
I mean, that one's definitely that's a rough question. I would say from a narrative standpoint, the Diablo Immortal story is delivered better, you know, because, well, it doesn't have a floating head taunting you throughout one of the entire acts, or someone screaming terror at you. You know, at its you cut out those parts from Diablo 3, and it has an actual, you know, a pretty decent story. You know, butterfly deaths, you know, not withheld. But you know, I want to say just, you know, but that also is the case with a game that came out 10 years later, and you have 10 years worth of, you know, cliff notes and stuff like that, and feedback from the community as how's you're going to write a modern Diablo story. You know, so there's definitely, you know, those components that are involved, because I mean, even the Diablo 3 writers went through, you know, they learned quite a bit going into Reaper of Souls. You know, that fundamentally changed, you know, how they were going through telling the story and such, and they learned a lot of lessons on that side. But I would say from like the vanilla Diablo 3 experience, yeah, you don't have Asmodan floating there, you know, taunting you with his strategy while supposedly being the greatest strategist in all of creation. So yeah, definitely. There's just, you know, I can understand it from what they're trying to do from a storytelling point, but it's way too much exposition.
Yeah, the Asmodan and then Belial in Act 2, where it's like, yeah, I know it's
yeah,
for the Lord of Lies. This does not seem like the bit.
Yeah, well,
which I think is a great transition into story missteps. Obviously, the narration and, well, not narration.
I see what you did there. You used me as a segue.
It's what I should do. The story's been in many hands, right?
Yeah.
And Diablo has grown in popularity over the years. You know, with Diablo 2 becoming a massive success. Not to you know, besmirch Diablo 1, because that was huge too, but Diablo 2 brings it into a much bigger audience, and then Diablo 3 being as hyped and anticipated as it was. The story, with decades in between, with Diablo 4, it's been in different hands, and as a result, there have been some missteps along the way, which might deter people from the lore itself. Where when you encounter Asmodan being an idiot, and you go, this story is not worth giving much more attention to. I love all the killing of monsters and getting loot. I'll just pay attention to that. What missteps do you think have happened that have turned people off from the lore? I'll start with you, Holy Knight. What do you think is a big misstep that has happened? And it doesn't have to be just be in the games, as Nineball kind of alluded to before, with some bad writing in the novels. But you know, that was decades ago. What do you think is the biggest mistake so far?
To me, Magda and Butterflies and Cain. Cain was probably our most loved character in the game, and to do that to him, words could be said, but I won't say them. He was my favorite.
I will.
Go for it. He was my favorite. Always will be.
I want to say that, yeah, that probably is one of the biggest missteps. It's not Cain dying, but it's the way that Cain died. And this is one that obviously it's easy to go through and sit here like literally 10 years later and go and critique the story. It was something that I had mentioned, you know, back on this very podcast like 10 years ago for how long I've been, people have still been inviting me back for some reason. And then I've talked about it on, my own show over the years and such. I think the single biggest thing that they could have done in order to help redeem the story, or not even redeem the story, but just to make it make more sense, it wasn't that Magna killed Deckard Cain, but if Leah did. If it was her uncontrolled power trying to break free from her chains of the cultists and such, and that explosion of power was then what had injured, Deckard and such, and gotten Magda to run away or flee, and then we going through and chasing her, Leah's story now becomes one of redemption, of that, she's trying to redeem herself because she accidentally killed Cain, and she needs to find a way to control her power, which leads her to her mother, which, I'll help you control your power, and how to control like the Black Soul Stone, while Adria is actually preparing her to become the vessel for the primeval, yada yada. It all still really flows together, and that one little subtle writing change really changes the narrative, her entire character, and like how you would potentially perceive her. So I think, in my opinion, that one is just the single biggest misstep in the lore. That it's like, it's not that I have a problem with Deckard Cain dying. It's literally sitting there in the very cutscene that he goes through and dies with the explosion of her and such, and it's just like, it would have made such a much more impactful story. It would have made her character so much more interesting, and you really didn't have to change the writing all that much. And it plays so well into it as well, of her being drawn into Adria's web and being manipulated and such. If she was not just trying to fight on for the memory of Deckard, but because she's trying to find forgiveness for his death.
I really like that. Just from that standpoint too, of Magda does kill him because he's not going to fix it, but like also because he's not going to fix the sword. But killing him doesn't make him fix the sword. So that kind of motivation, whereas an accidental death because of a power overload, makes a lot of sense to me, and I wholeheartedly agree that after saving Deckard Cain for 3 games, him dying, totally fine. He can't. If he was in Diablo 4, it would be like, well, he's got to die eventually. Like, he's just way too old. Nobody lives that long in Sanctuary at this point. So I like that Nightball. I really
I like it too.
Any other missteps as we're thinking about them outside of Cain, in the story as a whole?
In the story of the whole, I want to say that there's another one. After I went through and sung Diablo Immortal's praises, there is one aspect of the story that I really don't like, and kind of just like there's certain things that you can, like, they're in the game but they're not canon, such as like the Pandemonium event in Diablo 2. Introduced Lilith as Andariel's mother, which obviously is no longer the case. That is not canon, because Lilith is the daughter of Mephisto, and Andariel would be her aunt. If we're looking into demon genealogy, which is interesting. But it's the Immortal and Shadows storyline, because the Immortals themselves were created by Deidessa the Builder, who is one of the firstborn Nephilim, so potentially, a brother or sister of Rathma, or, second cousin or something like that. And her children, she imbued with a great power in order to defend the Sanctuary from the forces of hell. Well, the entire point of the Sin War trilogy was that for thousands or tens of thousands of years, hell didn't know that Sanctuary existed. So you would create this massive army of immortals and the most powerful beings in Sanctuary to defend Sanctuary against a threat that's never coming. Because in the actual timeline of Diablo, the first demon wasn't summoned into Sanctuary until like 3,000 years ago. And it was thousands of years before that recorded history even began. And then how many thousands of years before that were the firstborn? So like the story of Kion and Akiba, and the whole reign of the Shadows and the Immortals just doesn't jive with the rest of the story without retconning massive things. Because then, if demons are going and invading Sanctuary ever since its first creation, then what was the point of the Sin War? What was the point of all of that story and the subterfuge and stuff like that? Like, none of that then makes sense any longer with that particular timeline without massive, gigantic retcons. And also, just at the end of the day, you have Inarius with the World Stone, which was able to go through and say, like, fuck you to the Primevals. And they were scared of setting foot on Sanctuary themselves until they were able to manipulate enough of the populace to steal the power from their souls to even dare challenge Inarius. And you have just regular demons going through, showing up. And Inarius in his divine, vanity, he's almost like the archangel of vanity. Like, he's just so vain. He's not going to let some upstart Nephalim, who he sees as lesser beings that only exist because he deemed it that they were worthy of his pity to actually even stay alive. He wouldn't let them defend Sanctuary from demonic invasions. He'd be doing it himself. We're just like little pawns in his way. He doesn't give a shit about humanity. So it's just, yeah, the entire Immortal storyline, I just ignore it. Not the Immortal storyline, but the story of the cycle of strife of the Immortals versus the Shadows. It doesn't make sense in the grand scheme of things.
So, Nineball, you said the magic word, and you said it several times, and that's retcon. We've seen several retcons over the 25 years that the story's been around. Are you guys okay with more retcons going into Diablo 4? Now, we don't know much around the story, but are there certain things that if you found out that they changed, like let's say Nineball, they've been paying a lot of attention, and they go back and they retcon Deckard Cain's death. I don't know why they would, but let's say they did. Are we okay with more retcons, or would you prefer that the story just takes what has already been established and marches to its own beat, doesn't feel the need to kind of go back and tread any of the ground that has already been previously covered? Holy Knight, what are your thoughts on retcons?
Well, there was one thing I did for the Diablo2.net site, with the whole Kahagan and all that, Khalim as well and all that. I noticed later on in stories, it's like they took it away. Like, it's only dealing with the one guy and not Khalim, and it just, that was like, to me, that was one of the bigger retcons for me, because I worked so hard to gloss that over and fill it in, and then find out, meh. Like, don't you dare. That's for me. A retcon is okay to a point, but I hate them, and I always will. Sorry.
Nineball, retcons, good, bad?
So a retcon is basically a writer not having to be beholden to the story that came before when trying to go through and develop another or an interesting story point. So I don't necessarily have any issues with retcons. They happen all the time because they're fictional storylines. They're mutable. They're not set in stone. But you need to be able to make whatever it is that you're doing still like fit the rest of the narrative and be an interesting enough change to warrant the change when you could have just fit your piece of lore into the overarching story itself. Kind of like the Draenei from Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne going into the Draenei as we know them now in WoW. It's like it's a little tiny background race that's just kind of sitting there and doing whatever, and they don't have any impact whatsoever on the story, and then now turning them into giant holy space goats. It's like, is it a massive retcon? Yeah, it kind of is. It's gigantic and such, but did it have much of an impact on, did it change anything from the lore that had been kind of created prior to that? A little. It did. The orcs weren't the undisputed rulers of Draenor and stuff like that, but in the grand scheme of things, it didn't have too much of an impact on where the story had come from and such, and was kind of like, yeah, okay. That one, despite it being a relatively massive retcon, it was easy to digest. It was a easy digestible change. Same thing with, as I just mentioned. Well, Lilith is no longer Andariel's mother. She's the daughter of Mephisto. Oh, okay. It's a retcon. It was something that had went through and come before, and they made it into a very interesting story with the World Stone and Aria's creation of Sanctuary. And well, I mean, that cutscene that we got for Diablo 4 is 100% worth any type of retcon involving that. With just how badass it was. So retcons are just it's a narrative tool. It's a writing tool that sometimes I'm going to change this little piece of lore that was written 20 years ago because, well, it's holding certain ideas or narrative concepts back. As long as there's a reason to it. Like there's no reason for the Immortals to be the defenders of Sanctuary and completely undo the core facet of the Diablo 3 and future storylines involving the Nephalim, the World Stone, Anarius, Lilith, and all of that. It doesn't make any sense. Why would you even do that? That type of retcon is that, of course, then bad.
Is there anything, obviously in the transition from Diablo 3 to Diablo 4 that you could think possibly could be on the retcon chopping block? If there was something in the Diablo 3 story that you would go, I could see where they would want to change that.
Tyrael.
How so?
So when we were going through and talking about story missteps, I always wanted to pull up that, they're probably one of the other, next to Deckard Cain's death, probably one of the other biggest things that I've seen people complain about online is Tyrael giving up the wings. And those wings are the reason I'm on here talking right now. If we didn't have that cutscene at the end of Act 2, Diablo 2 probably would have just been this game isn't too bad, but that was a life-altering experience. And if you were playing this game back in 2000 and didn't feel the same way when he fucking just descended down and just grabbed Diablo's arm with his wing and fucking ripped him across the room, no, yeah, whatever. It was just that was one of those key points that's okay, now this game has got it going on. I gotta know more. That's a fucking angel. Oh man, that is just badass. Normally I freaking but I rooted for Cobra and G.I. Joe. Darth Vader is the coolest. I've always been on the side of the bad guys and everything. But then in Diablo, I see Tyrael for 5 seconds. I'm good guy all the way. Screw the bad guys. All other types of stuff. Tyrael won me over 100%. But that being said, a lot of people really hated the fact that he gave up his wings and became a human. But if you look at Tyrael narratively and the type of character that he is, it's 100% a thing Tyrael would do. I could 100% see that as a great character development for him. But that also means that eventually he's going to die. And to go deeper into the lore, although Diablo, Mephisto, Baal have come back many times, Tyrael came back after the destruction of the World Stone in Diablo 3. Demons resurrect. Demons are basically eternal. Their essence goes back down into hell and will eventually be given shape and form again. Angels do not. When they die, their essence does return to the Crystal Arch, and eventually that essence will be reborn, but that same angel will not be reborn. Someone that might, you might have an angel of justice, one of Tyrael's lieutenants or something like that, might come back again as an angel of justice, might have a little quirk or mannerism that would remind you of the angel that had come before, but it is an entirely new being, an entirely new personality. They're not the one that was prior. Tyrael himself being resurrected as Tyrael 20 years later was seen as a miracle in heaven. It had never happened before since the beginning of time, an angel resurrecting. So then if Tyrael dies as a human and then is later resurrected again as an angel, kind of, I guess, demeans his choice to become mortal a little bit. I mean, it completely undermines the entire, what's the point of becoming immortal if you're just going to resurrect and become immortal again, right?
Right.
But it's one of those ones where narratively it made a lot of sense. It was actually like one of those ones where a lot of people hated that decision in Diablo 3, and I thought that it was decent writing because it was a great character development for Tyrael. But I could see a potential misstep going into Diablo 4 of Tyrael resurrecting as an angel, just because there was so much of a fan backlash about it and such. That is just kind of reacting to it and kind of getting more of the player opt-in to like quote unquote undo mistakes of the past or whatever. But that's one potential misstep that I could see them going forward with, maybe in Diablo 4, which on one hand it would be cool to see those badass wings again, but on the other it does kind of undermine his story arc.
Yeah,
I'm very conflicted on that one. I probably would still be happy to see him again, but there'll always be that little twinge of like, man.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I would like to see him again. It's just,
and I can already tell you, I can already tell you that in the comments of everyone that was saying, it's like, yeah, that's a great Leah change. Yeah, Nineball's onto something, and then all the comments are just going to be like, Nineball's full of shit. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
If there was a character I would love to have actually seen come back, would have been Leah. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
That if they could have got her back, she would have definitely taken over Kane's role immediately. She was already kind of doing that before, but just she's the one character I would have loved to have had back.
I think that we're moving into speculation territory now. We've kind of transitioned away a little bit from retcons and moved into the speculation. So let's live in that zone as we look ahead to Diablo 4. What are we thinking story-wise? Where can this go? For me, one of the big things that I took away from Diablo 3 was this massive sense of power, right? That we are Nephalim, angels fear us, demons fear us, and we kind of get to run the show now. And then we have the Diablo 4 cinematic showcasing the return of Lilith, right? Where do Nephilim fit into Diablo 4? Am I going to hear that word a lot, do you guys think? Or is the story going to veer us into a more grounded reality that we see in a Diablo 2 or a Diablo Immortal? What do you guys think? What would be your speculation kind of going forward? Holy Knight?
My speculation, I think, would be it's probably going to be more grounded. The Nephilim, I think, personally, will be like legends of stories, of old now. That's the gist I get from them. So I'm sure the power is still there, but I think they just want to get away from the superpower thing, and just be more realistic, more grounded, and more visceral, etc. Like old Diablo.
Nineball? That's definitely a great point that you bring up, because just as I was talking about, why would Sanctuary need the Immortals if Inarius is around? Why would our character be involved with going through and hunting down and fighting Lilith if the Nephilim of Diablo 3 is still alive? So that's definitely one of those ones where it's like the one downfall of the Nephilim, of course, is that we're mortal. We live and then we die. So just like they did the 20-year time skip in between Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 to it's a great tool narratively to like reset things, reset the chessboard. That probably is something that I'm expecting, going into Diablo 4. That time is just going to be the thing that has solved the issue of the hero of Diablo 3. And so that way, it's not going to be anything in there. I do still expect, Nephilim to go through and kind of like come up. They do say that, of course, the whole big tagline for Diablo 4 is Return to Darkness. And so I see it as being a more grounded story, a la Diablo 2. Everything is dark and gritty and such. And we of course already know that Lilith is involved, and there's you can't mention Lilith without also mentioning Inarius, the World Stone, and Nephilim. So that is like a conjoined story. So I definitely see those as being components How much? I don't know. Like you in the cinematic, there's a brief flash of an angel that's chained, which is it's probably Anarius because you can't tell a story about Lilith without him. Do we travel into hell to free Anarius to help us fight against Lilith? Or is or is like Anarius freed at the end of it, and he and Lilith like team together in order to go through and try and fight back against us to create their whole new order or anything, or who knows? But there's definitely a lot out there to wrap up narratively. But and to continue on talking about speculation, there is of course the unidentified speaker that's wearing kind of Deckard Cain-like robes with the little heraldic icon on his robes. That is kind of like a lot of speculation been around. Is that Lorath? It would fit narratively, since he was the only like named Herodrum that we'd have to potentially go on and fill in that role of Deckard Cain going into the future. And then there is the leak on Amazon of next year they're releasing a new source book, the Book of Lorathnar, which I think kind of like goes through and kind of like shoes in that one. That's definitely him, but who's the brother who he's speaking to at the grave? Not looking good for our winged buddy.
So my son asked me this question because I did tell him like, hey, there's gonna be a Diablo 4. He's stoked. He doesn't understand my excitement yet, but we'll get there. Do you think Diablo makes an appearance in Diablo 4? This was his question, so this is courtesy of an 11-year-old. Does Diablo make an appearance, or could we get our first Diablo game that doesn't include Diablo?
You want my honest opinion? It would be a kind of a change of things to have him not be there, just be in the background, But it'd be more maybe centralizing around the all them instead. That's the gist I kind of get it. It's their time to shine now instead of like Diablo, because he's been there for all the other games. Why not change it up a little bit? Because this is going to be probably one of those games that goes on a while. So maybe an expansion or something might show up Diablo. That I think it's still going to be Lilith and them in the forefront personally.
Nemo?
One of my favorite quotes is from a friend, Zinkiki, who's like the head writer over at Diablo Fans, has said, "How can it be a Diablo game if it doesn't include Diablo?"
It's true.
He's been in all of them, even in Immortal, even if it's just for 30 seconds at the very end of the storyline, he's at least in it. His skull is in the opening cutscene in one of those flashbacks as well. Yeah. The Lilith statue, she's literally holding Diablo's skull and such. So it would seem as if he's gonna have to play some sort of part, in the game. That one almost seems like a shoo-in, because even like Diablo 2. He was the main bad guy of the core game, but wasn't the overarching villain of the entirety of Diablo 2. That was his brother Baal. So, but Diablo 4, we've got Lilith. I'd be surprised if Diablo is not included in some shape or form.
Yeah, the twisted there at the end or something. Yeah.
Would you be disappointed though if he does not make an appearance, and this is more, when we use the term Diablo, it's about the Diablo universe as opposed to about Diablo, the Lord of Terror?
I wouldn't be. I mean, it would mix it up personally. But obviously he's going to be in there some way, some form. But if he wasn't, I'd be okay with that a little bit personally. Because it is about the world of Sanctuary and not just himself. Because they've expanded the world out that much that we can go to other places and explore different areas and different parts of the world. Why not give it a chance to come out,
Yeah, I think you put that eloquently. That really is like the core aspect of it. Would I be disappointed? No, not really. For the reasons that Holy Knight just stated. That it it's like, if anything else, that just means that it gives more screen time for Lilith to be developed as a character and to be the main bad guy without having the looming story of, well, haha, surprise, it was Diablo all along or something like that. It's it gives more narrative focus as well as just more power in the story. If he doesn't appear, I wouldn't be broken up about it.
So, in the realm of speculation, let's go to the Deckard Cain death side of things. What is the worst story decision that Blizzard could make and implement in D4 that would enrage you to no end? Holy Knight?
No, you go first. I need to think about this.
Bringing Tyrael back as an angel? Can I say that? I mean, for the things that I just went through and ranted on, I think bait and switch. As I was kind of like alluding to before, if Lilith isn't the main bad guy in the game, let Lilith have her time to shine, especially all the marketing publicity, that friggin' statue. Just let her have her time. I think that would probably be one of the things I would be most. I push it so far out of my head, I completely forgot about it. The pale dude being Rathma. That would be the one thing that would piss me off more so than anything else, because everybody out on the goddamn internet wants to go through and say, "Oh, it's Rathma. It's Rathma. He called her mom, so that it has to be Rathma, because it's her actual son and stuff like that." And it's like, Rathma helped put her there. Why would he bring her back? Rathma was literally like, I would rather Sanctuary burn to the ground than letting Lilith have control over all of Sanctuary. He was literally going to stand there side by side with Odyssean, Mendelin, all the rest of the Nerazim and such, and go through and say, I'm going to go down fighting with you all, because we defeated Lilith. We're going to fight Inarius. We're going to fight heaven and hell, and we're going to die, but we're going to die free. And so he would never ever attempt to resummon Lilith into this world in order to quote unquote save us, because he knows that Lilith would use us nothing more than slaves as a weapon in order to go through and win the eternal conflict. So all of those fan theories and stuff like that out there, and they start talking about, oh, well, the summoner doesn't have his pinky and Rathma didn't have his pinky. No, nowhere in any of the lore is Rathma missing a finger. Like, yeah, someone has a finger cut off in those novels. It's not Rathma, and so I don't know where that one started, and all this other types of stuff. It's like, oh, he's a necromancer. He resurrected the corpse. No, he didn't resurrect the corpse. It was a glamour. It's not Rathma. It can't be Rathma. And if it is Rathma, I'm going to be angry.
Let's see. What would be another?
Before you start Holy Knight,
yeah,
I cannot wait for that to happen.
Oh, the dissertation that you will get in your inbox.
Just want to see it play out. But maybe they retconned it and it's going to be okay.
Don't use that against me. Don't you dare use that against me. I'll send you pictures of butterflies from here until.
Nah, here would be the ultimate retcon, though, and you probably heard it. It was all lies. And Belial's not the little what it is, and he's the more cunning one of them all. That would be although that would be a good one in a way.
It was also one of my favorite fan theories throughout the entirety of Diablo 3. What if it's actually Belial?
If they pulled that off, I'd be like, now we can actually write the story.
So Holy Knight, outside of Belial though, what would be the worst story arc that they could implement that would deter you?
I'm actually with 9 when it comes to Tyrael. I would love him to come back, but if they brought him back, it's a catch-22. Yay, cool, we got our favorite angel guy back, but it just destroyed everything that they built up on him. Let him go.
Fair enough. I mean, there is the general concept of fan service, trying to appeal to your broad audience, bringing back characters. Yeah. Is there, this was not in our little rundown beforehand, but is there somebody that you would expect to see again that we haven't talked about here today?
Man, I have to think that about. I have to think about that.
I mean, it I guess is one of those ones where it largely depends on how much of a time gap that we're working with between
Yes.
Diablo 3 and Diablo 4. I would like just to continue tradition. I wouldn't mind seeing maybe like an old, like a decrepit Nephilim, one of the
Hmm.
heroes of Diablo 3. It's one of those ones that I've got to rant for a little bit as if I haven't this entire show. The so the technically the story of Diablo 2 is like slightly, I don't even want to call it a retcon, but it's slightly modified. They've always kind of like modified the one that came before it. So like Diablo 1 was retconned so that way the warrior was Aiden, and they actually gave identities to the rogue and the sorcerer. And then in Diablo 2, of course, you're chasing after, Aiden, the warrior of Diablo 1. The Blood Raven is the rogue from Diablo 1, and the summoner, who's posing as Horizon, is the sorcerer from Diablo 1. Uh, I would like to see, even though they didn't feature in the game, like one of Li Ming, the wizard in Diablo 3, her mentor was Isandra, the sorceress from Diablo 2. Zale is featured in Diablo Immortal, who is the necromancer. And, you have some of the characters going through and having like their little introductions and such. The story of Diablo 2 was changed that it wasn't any one individual hero that defeated Diablo 2's Diablo and Baal, that it was actually the combined all of them together is what defeated, the prime evils at that point. They have structured the word Nephilim in such a way that is both singular and plural. So the end of Diablo 3 is not yet been codified in canon of if it was a singular hero or the group of Nephilim together that defeated Malthael. It is kind of set up in a way that it is just the singular, Nephilim is kind of like how it is set, but it could end up being all of them together are the ones that actually defeated it. And if that's the case, it brings the power level down a little bit from being pure godlike, and maybe one individual old decrepit hero isn't going to be the one that's the savior of Sanctuary anymore, kind of like the passing of the torch. I would like to see in Diablo 4 maybe some of the old heroes from Diablo 3. What are they up
That
to,
is
or
one
learning of
thing
their
I
fates
did
or
like
something
what
along
they
those
did
lines?
for all those characters, giving them some more personality, more than just the archetype. They actually have something, which means then your player character, in a way, is in the world and it has a place. I would love to see that in Diablo 4. Just even if it's
Mm-hmm.
just stories and legends. And like you said, a couple of them that could be really, really old, and they could reminisce about all the memories of their friends or fellow Nephilim and all that. I would absolutely love that.
That it does remind me of in Diablo 3 before it was released, there were short stories around each character, kind of
Yeah.
filling in some of those
Mm-hmm.
gaps, which you
Hmm.
had mentioned, Nine Ball. I really enjoyed those. It was really nice to kind of get hyped for the game, but then also place it within time. I would love to see that for Diablo 4, just to get an idea of where these particular heroes are coming from. In particular, the Druid, because what were they doing for so long?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I have a Druid bias, and I need more. Is what I'm saying. Is I need more Druid. All right, so we've covered a lot, and there's a lot out there. Obviously, we
Mhm.
know we scratched the surface. But any last thoughts, guys, when it comes to Diablo lore or your hopes for uh, the future right now?
Well, I'm really hoping that they, like I said, they really flesh out, you know, in Arius and Lilith, and just let us get to know those characters because we kind of got an idea in terribly written books, but we got an idea. I can't wait to. I can't wait personally for more.
Nemo?
And pick up of what you just said, Xanth, with like something similar to the Heroes Rise, Darkness Falls, all those short stories that we got as the introduction to all of the classes. Some of those stories involved the actual hero themselves, such as Li Ming and Vala, but some of the other ones, such as like the witch doctor and the monk, were actually adjacent to the character who would later on go and become, the icon of that class for Diablo 3, such as the witch doctor story isn't Nazebo, the witch doctor, but someone that was had a similar story to him. I would like to see something like that introduces the classes going into Diablo 4 while addressing what it looks like. Because one of the things that a lot of people don't realize with the ending of the story of Diablo 3 is that 90% of the world's population was killed by Malthael. It wasn't just Westmarch. He was everywhere. The angelic host of wisdom was down there slaughtering everybody, everywhere. That's a pretty significant thing to go through and happen. And even if it has been decades since, those would be scars that probably haven't healed. In particular, the necromancers, the defenders of sanctuary, our Justice League, their order only ever measured in the hundreds, and literally the last necromancer left at the end of Diablo 3 was the hero. Your character was like one of the last necromancers that were there, and possibly Zale, because he had survived just outside of Westmarch. But you had the grand masters of the necromancer order, the priests of Rathma, going through and saying, you have to carry on the legacy now because you're all that's left. Malthael knew that the necromancers were the biggest foil and potential thing that could stop him, and so he didn't hit Westmarch first. After he got the Black Soulstone, he went straight to the Sunken City and killed off all of the necromancers in order to make sure that the priests of Rathma couldn't stand against him. So, that's a heavy story to go through and try and build off of to then introduce the necromancer in Diablo 4. So that's a lot to go through and take on there. How other necromancers are existing right now, and what that has done to the priests of Rathma since then.
It's kind of like a caveat where, like you said, we want to know how the previous heroes were. Well, now, if you think about it like that, well, they are all the grandmasters and teaching their orders and everything now, and now, so we're definitely going to get information about them because, we can learn something. That's for sure.
I sure hope so.
Me too.
Well, thank you both for joining me today, and for obviously imparting all of the lore knowledge that you both contain. We'll end the way we always do with a good old moo. Moo, 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 moo,
Moo,
moo.
moo, 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 moo.
Moo.
Nice.